Hello again. Now to a successful effort that could lead to the revitalisation of more ghost estates around the country. The Clwyd Housing Association has provided 35 brand new houses in Athy in Kildare to 35 households from the town's housing waiting list. The purchase led to NAMA investing in completing the estate, which had attracted vandalism and antisocial behaviour. Well, Simon Brooke, Clwyd's head of policy, is here with me now. Simon, let's look at this before we go into the wider issue. What exactly have you done in Athy and how did it come about?
Good morning, Anthony. Well, maybe the first thing I should do is just explain what a housing association is.
Do.
Because not all viewers may be familiar. Housing associations are independent, not-for-profit charities that are set up to provide good quality, affordable housing for people on local authority housing waiting lists. So that means mainly people whose income is low that so they can't afford to pay market rents and can't afford to buy their own homes. So that's what Clwyd is. There are a large number of housing associations in the country, but Clwyd would be one of the biggest. And
but let's stay away from Athy for a moment then. What have you been doing up to this point in finding houses? How do you go about it?
Well, until recently, the way that we bought houses or built houses was that the government gave us a grant,
okay.
100% grant, and with that money we would go out and build or buy houses that would then be rented out to people from local authority housing waiting lists. Then with the economic crisis, the situation changed and the government introduced a new funding scheme which is based on really us getting loans, getting mortgages in effect, to buy the houses that we then rent out. So the way it works is that in the case of Athy, we spent £2.5 million on buying the houses from the developer through NAMA, and we got a 30% loan. A third of that was a loan, long-term loan from the government, and the other 70% from an organisation called the Housing Finance Agency, which is a kind of bank that lends money to local authorities and to housing associations.
And are these the pictures of Athy now?
These are the pictures of Athy now.
So what was there? Empty shells, was it?
Part of it empty shells, yes. There are 400 houses altogether on the estate. 35 of them were empty and the others were occupied. And as a consequence of the empty houses, there was a lot of antisocial behaviour. And you know yourself that any area where there are empty houses will suffer in its reputation. So by renovating those houses, NAMA was then able to finish the estate, because there's some parts of the estate that needed work to finish them. And we were then able to move 35 households into those houses from the waiting list.
And for them, they've moved now from the waiting list. Do they pay for the house? Is it theirs? How does that operate?
They pay us rent.
Okay.
And in Ireland we have a fairly unique system for paying rent, which is based on the tenant's income. So if their income goes up, their rent goes up. If their income goes down, their rent goes down. So it's a very fair system. But that isn't enough for us to pay the repayments on the loans that we have. So the government gives us a subsidy which more or less fills that gap, because although we're a not-for-profit organisation, we're also a not-for-loss organisation. We can't afford to have substantial losses on the work that we're doing.
Well, those 35 houses, as you said, cost you over £2.5 million.
Yes.
So you did have to find the money somewhere.
That's right.
And
yes.
you can't fail you have to. Where do you explained where you got it? Beyond that, do you see this being a possibility in other ghost estates, because we all know towns that have them around the country?
Yes, I think that it's important. In the case of ghost estates, I hope that there will be more Coney boroughs. We're working with NAMA on a number of other schemes across the country. Some of them are ghost estates and some of them aren't, because not all the properties that NAMA has are ghost estates. But I think it's part of a bigger problem of empty properties generally across the country. I don't think anyone really knows how many there are right now at the moment. Less than there used to be. A lot of work's been done on ghost estates. But it's important to remember that NAMA only controls a small proportion of the empty properties across the state. And there are some areas where there are clusters of, very large clusters of empty properties, typically in the border counties like Leitrim and Cavan, where in Leitrim I think there's enough housing for the next 40 years. And the simple truth is a lot of it should never have been built. And I think the government itself is thinking that about 40 estates are going to have to be demolished.
And what you've done here, I mean, it's innovative in a way, but What's the bigger problem of people on housing lists, the lack of housing? How serious is that?
It is a very serious problem. We certainly in Ireland, we have a shortage, an overall shortage of social housing, and the number of people on housing waiting lists is growing. So we're facing a huge challenge in terms of providing the housing that people need. And one of the big change that has happened recently has been a change in emphasis from local authorities to housing associations. And the main reason for that is that is to reduce government spending, because if Clwyd borrows money from the Housing Finance Agency, then the repayments on that loan don't count as government spending.
Okay.
Whereas if the local authority would do the similar thing, and it would count as government spending. So it's a way of using making a small amount of government money going a long way. So we're hoping that we're able that funding mechanism, which has taken some time to establish because it's new for everybody. Excuse me. We hope that when that's properly in operation, we'll be able to crank up the number of houses that we've produced. But last year we created nearly 400 new homes for people, and this year rather, I hope to be more than that.
And just finally, when we talk about the housing list, is it a family of 5? Are they 5 people on the housing list, or is it a family? Does that count as one?
They're
yes, one. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. The waiting list is actually is rather misleading. There are 88,000 households on housing waiting lists across the country. So a family of 5 would count as one.
Oh, so the number is much larger.
The actual number of people is much greater than that. But if you actually drill down and look at those lists, it's actually not quite as bad as it appears to be in some respects. The biggest chunk of people, about 60%, are living in good quality housing. Their problem is they can't afford it. People in private rented housing who can't afford to pay the rents. They have a housing need, and ideally we would love to be able to house them in social housing. But we really need to focus on the people who are living in overcrowded accommodation or poor quality accommodation, or who are homeless and living in hostels.
And keep coming up with innovative ideas that can pay for themselves as well.
Right.
Simon Brooke, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.
Thanks. The Oscar-winning actor Richard Dreyfuss